Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hands, and this video is going to be episode 1 in a series of videos looking at each decade in horror, starting with the 1950s, and for each decade picking the best movie from every year of that decade. So we'll start today with the 1950s and then go on to the 60s, the 70s, all the way through to the 2010s. Thought this would be a fun thing to do, and of course you can get your lists in below and share them with everyone. So, episode 1 today, starting with the 1950s. Let's get straight into it. Alright, 1950. Now, you're going to have to hear me out on this one, and I hate to start the series in controversy, but horror movies from the year 1950, I got nothing. I cannot find a horror film from the year 1950. I've been over the collection, I've scoured the internet, I cannot find one. The most I can find is a few soft sci-fi films, courtesy of Wikipedia, which I've not seen and I don't feel certainly count as the greatest film of that decade. So I'm really sorry, thumbs down if you need to, but I cannot find you a film from 1950 or 1952. Both of those years, there seems to be nothing. Those are the only 2 years in this entire series where I don't have any options. But for whatever reason, 1950 and 1952, I cannot find a horror movie. And while we're on those years, I was musing a little bit of why that is. I don't have an answer. Whether after the real horrors of World War II, they weren't in the right mind frame to make a horror movie or a creature feature. It's too early for Hammer. Kind of the vintage Universal monster movies had sort of fizzled out by the late 40s. You're still coming out of the 40s, so they're not at that kind of space age, atomic, giant bug stage of the 50s yet. So, I don't know, but for whatever reason, if you know one, please let me know. But 1950 and 1952 is completely light on the ground for horror movies. Okay, 1951. So there's a couple of great movies that came out in this year that I could have easily picked for this spot. The close runner-up was The Thing from Another World. So awesome movie from the 50s. James Arness as the Thing monster. Got some really good moments in this one. I kind of go for the 80s version of The Thing over the 50s one. So I haven't gone for that one. But the movie I'm going to go for, my pick of 1951, is The Man from Planet X, which is a really cool kind of UFO movie. Spaceship lands in like the Scottish moors, and this alien gets off the ship, and he's coming from like a dying planet, and sort of reaches out to the scientists that are investigating him to sort of help him with his dying planet. But it's sort of like, is he friend or foe? I not reveal that, and there's a few kind of unscrupulous characters that have got some ulterior motives for the situation. But I really like The Man from Planet X. It has a mysterious feel to it, and most notably is the really cool look of the man from Planet X with this sort of big sort of goldfish bowl space helmet on. He's got this really sort of weird looking face, and I don't know, he just always looked kind of creepy, but I was intrigued by him at the same time. It's a really wonderful little film from 1951, and that's why it's my pick for that year. So as I say, couldn't find anything for 1952, so we'll move straight on to 1953. Okay, so 1953 has a few cool movies that came out. Invaders from Mars, which was a fun one. It came from outer space. It's been a long time since I've seen that, but I do know John Carpenter cites that movie as being a big inspiration for him getting into filmmaking, and the original War of the Worlds. But the movie that I want to go for 1953 is The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which is just a straight up awesome monster movie from the 50s. Starting in the Arctic Circle, they detonate some bomb which wakes up this giant lizard monster creature that makes his way from the Arctic Circle into a major city and just starts to destroy everything in cool stop motion fashion. It was the first time Ray Harryhausen had full control over the monster effects in this movie, and he does some great work in this one. 50s monster movie regular Kenneth Tobey is in this one. Always great to see him. And there's a young Lee Van Cleef in this towards the end of the movie that's helping to try and stop the beast from 20,000 Fathoms. But yeah, for 1953, as I say, great example of just a straight up stop motion monster movie. This one is my pick for that year. So 1954, now there's three big hitters from this year. Any of them I could have picked as my choice on any other day. You've got Creature from the Black Lagoon, a classic universal monster, needs no introduction or explanation. And then you've got Them, one of the best examples of the giant bug movies from the 1950s. But the one I'm going to go for 1954 is the original Godzilla, the original Japanese version, the debut of Godzilla, arguably the most famous movie monster of all time, his first outing. And the first Godzilla is still a really good and quite scary and downbeat movie. I believe it's H-bomb testing awakens Godzilla, who wakes up and rises to destroy Tokyo. So a bit of a metaphor going on there in that respect. But the very first Godzilla is kind of devoid of any of the sort of the silliness or the playfulness of the later Godzilla movies. It's a pretty dark movie, and it's presented in like this really kind of rundown, sort of smog-filled world where Godzilla's destroying everything. It's a pretty dark and serious movie. Godzilla doesn't really have much character in this one. He just rises up to destroy everything in this sort of fit of giant monster rage. But it's a great first movie for Godzilla. Still holds up really well. Still kind of packs a punch in terms of its social, political messaging, if you want to look at it in that way. And yeah, it's just a great movie. So for 1954, there's a couple of awesome movies in this year. I had to go with the debut of Godzilla and pick the original Godzilla movie. Right, 1955, getting to that real kind of quality 50s heyday at this stage. Some really cool movies that came out in this year. So Phantom from 10,000 Leagues, that's a good one with a pretty awesome undersea creature. It Came from Beneath the Sea, another good one with an undersea creature. Some great Harryhausen effects in that one. Quatermass Experiment, a wonderful example of British sci-fi horror. Tarantula, of course, one of the most iconic movies from the 50s. Creature with the Atom Brain, that was a good one. That was like a mob movie, but with zombies. They were doing these experiments on gangsters and turning them into these creatures. But the movie that I'm going to go for 1955, it's just edged it slightly because it's a personal favourite of mine, is This Island Earth, which is just such an awesome movie of these aliens that make contact with a scientist, and a bit similar to Man from Planet X. Their planet is dying and they reach out to these scientists for help, but there may be a bit more going on than that, and I'll leave you to find that out in this wonderful 50s movie. It's also got the Metaluna Mutant, one of my favourite monsters from the 1950s, and it's just a really awesome film to watch. Now, for years, I'd only ever seen This Island Earth as the Mystery Science Theater 3000 movie, presentation. And I kind of never got around to watching it, thinking I would not be able to take it seriously after seeing Mystery Science Theatre make fun of it for the whole film. But I've got to say, even without Mystery Science Theatre, it's such an enjoyable film and is actually like a really, really good film. Don't let the Mystery Science Theatre label put you off. Both versions of the movie are very entertaining for different reasons, but the original This Island Earth is just such a strong example of great 50s filmmaking. So for 1955, This Island Earth is my pick. Right, 1956, so still in that prime 50s era. A few movies here that were really good. Earth versus the Flying Saucers, that one nearly made my pick because I think it's a great example of the 1950s and the portrayal of space age anxiety and sort of UFO visitors coming down and causing trouble. The Mole People, that was a good one. I love the Mole People creatures in that one. And X, the Unknown, all of them were close contenders. But the one I had to go for 1956 is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now this is kind of like the blueprint for the 1950s. When I watch something from that decade, I am often thinking, is it going to be as good as Invasion of the Body Snatchers? This has pretty much everything that made that decade so charming and enjoyable. You've got the threat from outer space, the creature feature aspect with the pod people, the picturesque 50s town, and that uncertainty and that paranoia of an outside threat taking over. And it's just really well done, really well put together, fantastic ending. Kevin McCarthy is great in this movie. So yeah, one of the absolute best from the 50s, and definitely the one that I had to go for 1956. On to what has to be the best year of the 1950s, 1957. This was just a magical year that had so many awesome movies released. It's kind of like 1981. I've talked about that year before being the best year for horror. It's the 1981 of the 50s, 1957. So many awesome movies in this year. 20 Million Miles to Earth with the awesome monster in it. Attack of the Crab Monsters, Black Scorpion, some great stop motion in that movie. Curse of Frankenstein, so Hammer getting in on the action at this point. From Hell It Came, really fun tree monster movie. The Giant Claw, which is both awesome but absolutely silly. Incredible Shrinking Man. I Was a Teenage Frankenstein and I Was a Teenage Werewolf, two of my personal favourites there. And Quatermass 2, great sequel to the original movie. But the one I'm going to go for, and again, it's a personal favourite of mine, so it's edged it slightly, is The Monster That Challenged the World, which is such a fun 50s monster movie. Taking place like around this kind of naval camp, and they become under attack from this awesome kind of like slug-like sea monster that initially attacks a couple of the Navy soldiers on the base and then kind of moves its way on land. And there's a really awesome scene where it's causing a lot of trouble in the laboratory and going after this woman. But it's such a cool monster. They're not afraid to show it. It looks awesome. There's a few kind of blueprints in this for things like Jaws and some of the later 70s movies, and it's just an absolute joy to watch. I cannot recommend The Monster That Challenged the World enough for a really fun 1950s monster movie. On to 1958, where if you look at the releases on paper, is pretty much not far off as good as 1957. Some great movies that came out in this year. You've got The Blob, the original with Steve McQueen, The Brain Eaters, one of my favourite titles in horror, Colossus of New York, that was a really good one. Dracula, so Hammer Horror. I almost picked Dracula. It was in my hand. I almost went for that one. Earth versus the Spider, which is a really fun one. Frankenstein's Daughter, great like exploitation B movie from the 50s. I Married a Monster from Outer Space, another really good one. Surprisingly sinister movie, despite its title. And It, The Terror from Beyond Space, another really good one, said to be the inspiration for Alien. But the one that I'm going for 1958 is The Fly, because I think this is a great crossover of like that horror creature feature and the science aspect of the 1950s. I love the look of the fly creature in this. It's obviously, of course, it's not as good and as gooey as the 80s version, but I really like this. It's still an enduring looking creature. You got Vincent Price in this, and I think if you're doing a video on the 1950s, you've got to have some Vincent Price representation. So it was very close between the horror of Dracula and The Fly, but I just went for The Fly because of that kind of creature feature and science fiction aspect that was so prevalent in the 50s. And finally, on to the last year of the 1950s, 1959. Another good year for releases. You got The Killer Shrews, great early example of a killer animal movie. The Man Who Could Cheat Death, really captivating tale, starring Anton Diffrin and Christopher Lee. The Wasp Woman, really good one about this woman working in the cosmetic industry who this serum she puts on turns her into a wasp woman. Beast from Haunted Cave, not a great movie, but a cool looking monster. But the one I'm going to go for 1959, I had to have some Hammer representation, and I've gone for The Mummy, which is a great adaptation of the Mummy tale. Christopher Lee as the Mummy, taking revenge on some explorers that desecrate the sort of Muriel of his old ancient queen, and he comes after him, and he's, as I'm sure you know, the kind of the dusty, creepy looking mummy. I love the fact that he's like a Egyptian mummy, but he's walking around on the English moors. That's really, really awesome. And the confrontation he has with Peter Cushing at the end is really something to watch. It's a great moment in the movie. And it comes crashing through the doors and lunges at Peter Cushing. So yeah, ending the video with some Hammer horror. That is my pick for 1959. So this is where we're at with my picks for this decade. Let me know what you think of that, guys. If you can think of any of those movies from 1950 or 1952, please let me know. And if you like what I've put, that's great. If not, let me know what you would have picked for the other years. I'd be really interested to know. So thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for episode 2, where we'll be doing this with the 1960s.